I'm Ari Mark, the owner of Ample, and director and executive producer of The Invisible Pilot on HBO.
And I'm Phil Lott, co-director and co-executive producer of The Invisible Pilot.
Gary was a crop duster.
The best pilot the Top Gun program had ever known.
I didn't think they talked about our double life.
Gary became an international drug smuggler, and he made millions of dollars.
It gets complicated.
His wife ought to have an Academy Award.
Gary Betzner was tripping into one of the biggest political scandals of his lifetime.
This is Factual America. We're brought to you by Alamo Pictures, an Austin and London-based production company, making documentaries about America for international audiences. I'm your host, Matthew Sherwood. Each week I watch a hit documentary and then talk with the filmmakers and their subjects. This week it is my pleasure to welcome award-winning filmmakers Phil Lott and Ari Mark, co-directors and executive producers of The Invisible Pilot. The HBO Docuseries captures the incredible story of Gary Betzner, an Arkansas crop duster who died under mysterious circumstances. Or did he? The mystery around this man's death would be more than enough for a compelling doc, but that is only the beginning of a story that proves that truth is most definitely stranger than fiction. Given the unlikeliest of events set against the backdrop of 1970s and 80s America and Reagan's war on drugs, the docuseries is Forrest Gump meets American Made meets All the President's Men. Stay tuned as we discuss this incredible American story with Phil and Ari. If you're worried about spoilers, and there will be more than a few, please watch the series as this tale has more twists and turns than the river where Gary's body was never found. Phil and Ari, welcome to Factual America. How are things with you?
Oh, great. Really good to be here. Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Well, thank you. The film, if for our listeners, is The Invisible Pilot, released on HBO early April this year. It's on HBO Max. Is there plans, or is there an international release associated with this as well?
Yeah, I believe it's going all around the world, but I believe in the UK, I think it's on Sky Atlantic. I think it's coming out shortly.
Yeah, it tends to go. There's this tie-in with Sky and HBO, so we'll do have a look for it. I mean, it isn't. I don't even know where to begin with this one. This is an incredible story. So thank you so much. And I've been humming Crystal Gale in my head for the last few days since watching this. So tell you where I'm coming from with this one, but. Maybe Phil, maybe you can get us started. What is, if it's possible to give a synopsis, what is The Invisible Pilot all about?
So The Invisible Pilot is about this small town, everyman guy, family guy, well-liked. One day in 1977, he takes his kids to ice cream and he pulls his car over at the side of the road. And it's in the middle of a bridge, and he gets out of the car and he jumps off it and disappears. And over the course of 3 episodes, we sort of follow and unwrap this amazing story of what happened that day and how he ended up going toe to toe with the American president.
Yeah, indeed. So I've already done this in the intro, but I will do some a spoiler alert here because. But I mean, it just says so much about the film that what you've just described is only the tip of the iceberg when it comes to this story. So, but if you haven't had a chance to watch it, please do. Highly recommend it. And then, before you do that, maybe give us a like, but then go watch it and then come back and listen to how they, Ari and Phil made this film. Ari, essentially, it's the life of an already dead man. Is that one way to pitch it?
Yeah, that's a cool way to pitch it. We should remember that for next time. I mean, and just so you know, it's a 3-part series, and so I think that just so audiences know, and the 3rd episode just premiered. So all 3 now are on HBO Max, the streaming platform for HBO. But I think that's a really great way to pitch it by means of sort of pulling people in and sort of forcing them to kind of watch one episode. And I think the challenge is watch one episode and we feel as though we've sort of narratively constructed it that it will sort of push you to want to watch episodes 2 and 3. And but episode 1, you know, if you think of them in chapters, is very much about, you know, about a quote unquote dead man, what it means to die, and you know, how this particular character, I think, is like kind of weirdly complex, is able to really just sort of ascend to unexpected heights, partially out of fearlessness, partially out of just like sort of sheer, you know, gall, you know. And I think there's a tweak of sort of like, you know, Americanism in there, of this sort of like pursuing the dream and doing whatever the hell you want to do whenever you want to do it, you know, your own way.
I mean, as you say, I mean, there's so many historical and cultural touch points here. I mean, there's 60s and 70s hippie culture and free love and go-go 80s and cocaine and the war on drugs and Iran-Contra scandal, which many of us had forgotten about somehow. And this all revolves around a crop duster from Arkansas. I mean, Phil, how did you come across this incredible story?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I mean, it's probably the most incredible thing for us was the story's been in our world for about 12 years now. I was at a film festival in Sonoma, and just, you know, I'm English and I like to talk to people. And it's like most of there's wine up there, so it was a couple of glasses of that. And I met this screenwriter who'd been given a job of fictionalizing the story for a local filmmaker called Craig Hodges. And he was working through the story, and I was just asking about how what his script was about, and he was telling me this story, and I kept saying, "But you made that bit up, right? You made that bit up, right? You made that bit up, right?" And he was like, "No, this is all true. This is all true stuff." And I think I finished that conversation. I was like, "I need this guy's number, because I don't think he should be making a fiction script. I think he should be making a documentary. This is a stranger than fiction story, and this guy deserves a story." And it's taken us a long time to kind of get in with the family and get in with Gary and convince them that we're the right people to tell the story.
Okay. But you must have thought immediately, as you said, you had a gold mine on your hands with this story. But now you mentioned the filmmaker that was a local guy who was already on the case. Was he actually, he was trying to make a scripted film, is that right? He wasn't trying to do a doc. Is that the situation when you came in?
Yeah, I mean, he look, to his credit, I mean, I think he knew the story was exceptional, but you know, he doesn't actually work in TV or film, and so he doesn't have some of the storytelling experience. And I think for him, it was really, you know, realizing he had something special, but not necessarily knowing what form it needed to take. And by the way, it probably would make a great, you know, scripted show. And I think, you know, and I think there's certainly merit there, but you know, because audiences are so, you know, I think quite savvy now, and also tired of being lied to, you know, I think there's an element with nonfiction where you can really surprise people in a way that you can't really do in fiction anymore. And so, you know, you look at the script and stuff, it's like, you know, what else, you know, dystopian, horror, like what do you want? It's out there, you've got it. With nonfiction, it's like you never really run out of sort of intellectual property, because it's real, you know, it's real stories, real people. If you find the right ones and you tell them the right way, you know, sometimes you can reveal something, I think, a little bit deeper than meets the eye. And so with this guy, Craig Hodges, for him, it was really a story of a close family friend, right? And that was how he pursued it. And for us, it was, well, that's great, but this is much bigger than that. You know, I mean, that might be a micro element, but if you take a step back from this thing, you know, and you give it a little perspective and a little bit of sort of fresh air, what really is it? You know, and it's much bigger than some hippie, you know, guy. You know, it's much bigger than that, I think. And we don't want to cram it down people's throat or hit them over the head with these ideas or these sort of cultural touch points, to use your word. But if they unravel organically and you get this, he's floating through these historical moments, it feels really kismet. And I think that's what partially makes the story very special. And we were able to help get to that point.
And so, you know, you were introduced to the story, but you were just kind of slowly unpeeling the onion and then so as you're drilling down, then you're actually then having to take that step back, realizing that you have a much bigger story that anyone else had any idea they had on their hands.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you know, stranger than fiction stuff is sort of it's kind of our currency. It's kind of what gets us excited as filmmakers. And so, you know, everything that we make has, I think, a little bit of that element. But in this case, I mean, our process is we like to really sort of talk to everyone, learn everything we can, and then really put pen to paper and really think through, like, how do we want the audience to experience it, right? And how do we want to experience it in a way that's entertaining? I think sometimes people forget that just because it's nonfiction, just because it's a documentary, you know, it doesn't mean it's solely educational or intellectual. I mean, it should also entertain, and it should also, you know, do its job of changing your perspective, right? Or challenging your perspective. And so, you know, how you frame it and how you write it, even though they're real events, is sort of the key.
Well, I must say, and I'm sure I don't do the film justice, but everyone I try to give my own version of a synopsis to just become slack-jawed, and I'm like, that's just the first 30 minutes, right? And they're just like, wow, how do I get, you know, and we're here in the UK, so they're like, how can I watch this? You know, and even my 17-year-old daughter, who's not very impressed, was extremely impressed. So, but this story, I mean, if this story gets even crazier now, I think for a lot of us, and I'm, you know, from the U.S. originally and born and raised there, and I've actually been to Des Arc, Arkansas. But I think I may have even been on that bridge, crossed that bridge when I was a little kid on a cross-country trip, but I'm not for certain. But, you know, as crazy as the story sounds, and, you know, I mean, it gets, maybe you could briefly explain to people what the U.S. government was up to in the 1980s. I think we many of us have kind of boxed and shelved that and forgotten how crazy a story that was in and of itself.
Yeah, I mean, in episode 2, Gary comes across this guy, who it turns out to be Oliver North and his compatriots. And what they're doing is they're using this network of pilots who are bringing in drugs, cocaine from South America into America. And they're using those empty planes going back down south to kind of be their own personal FedEx, you know, taking a bunch of weapons down to Nicaragua, where Reagan was fighting a war against what he perceived as a threat from the Soviets, who were sort of Soviet influence, having a beachhead down in Nicaragua. And, you know, this is a generation of people that had lived off the Red Scare, and they fundamentally were opposed to communism, and they were funding this group of soldiers who were standing up against this force down there. But, you know, interestingly, what had happened is Congress and the government had specifically passed legislation to tell Reagan he couldn't do this. They knew that he was interested in this war down there. And America wasn't interested in getting involved in a war down there. So they specifically passed legislation to prevent Reagan from funding or financing or sending weapons down there. So he needed to do it covertly because this is a sort of fundamental belief of his. And so he tasked Oliver North with figuring out how to get weapons down there. And so he basically created this network of arms dumps in America, shipping them down to the airports in the middle of the jungle and on hillsides down there. And that's how Gary, our central character, ends up being one of these pilots, and one of the best pilots, doing a few routes down there, doing a few trips down there, and offloading weapons. And you know, there's a piece of it that you know that Gary knows his weapons because he always checks his loads. But I think, you know, the interesting thing in terms of how this sort of collides with our story is that Gary and Reagan were both motivated by what they believed were doing things that were right.
Right.
And ends up being, one of them ends up being a kind of a celebrated president, and the other one goes to jail for 22 years.
Yeah. I mean, I guess that's the whole. I mean, you actually have come across. I mean, I don't know how many people have looked, but you've come across one of the pilots. We heard about these guys. I mean, I'm old enough to remember when this broke originally, and we were hearing about this. I mean, it was. I mean, no reason to touch on this, but it was what a crazy story. I mean, they were dealing with the Iranians. You had someone like Robert McFarlane who brought a birthday cake and a Bible to the Iranians, and then this idea that you're going to take money from them, fund the Contras, but then the added element of then, well, while you're at it, you might as well ship cocaine back.
And while that's happening, we have the war on drugs. So happening domestically, which is just like the biggest irony ever.
Yeah, exactly. And then this guy who, well, as I said, there's spoiler alerts, but we know he's dead, or at some point he's dead. But this guy is involved. He's, I think he even pointed out, at Top Gun school, he was considered one of the best pilots they ever had. I mean, he had this incredible character, is hobnobbing with Pablo Escobar, and people like that. It's
And all the hit.
Yeah, I mean, it's just when does it stop? But maybe we will stop just quickly to give people a chance to catch their breaths, and then we'll be right back with Phil and Ari, the co-directors of The Invisible Pilot. It's on HBO, or stream it on HBO Max. If you enjoy Factual America, check out the Movie Maker podcast. That's all one word, Movie Maker, where our friends at moviemaker.com interview everyone from filmmakers just breaking in to A-listers like David Fincher and Edgar Wright about their movie-making secrets and behind-the-scenes tricks of the trade. They go deep and let the guests speak uninterrupted to get you the most film insight. Now back to Factual America. Welcome back to Factual America. I'm here with award-winning filmmakers Phil Lott and Ari, co-directors and executive producers of The Invisible Pilot. Released on HBO in early April, earlier this year. You can find it on HBO Max. Google it for international releases. Here in the UK, I think it's going to be on Sky Atlantic. I'm almost certain of that. So we were talking about this crazy story about this guy named Gary Betzner, or all of his many other aliases that he had, and as we discover that, and he even kind of gives us clues on how people can do what he did. He served his complete time, almost complete time. Why was that? I mean, he had all this dirt on the government. He testifies for Congress. You can find the complete testimony. I'd found it. It's on C-SPAN, still has it up on their website. He's working with Senator Kerry's committee that was investigating this. How did he end up serving all that time and not orchestrating a deal with the government?
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things that obviously in episode 3 we dig into, that he feels sort of hard done by, because he felt like he had this free pass. And I think for a lot of time down there was this sort of idea of a free pass. And in fact, we had a story that we don't put in the show, but there was a prosecutor down in Miami, and he was telling stories of, he'd be given a number to call, and that number was a White House number to kind of call and sort of get these guys off. Mm-hmm. And that all checked out, by the way, in our fact checking. Just didn't have time to put it in the show, but and then also the top of episode 3, we see this sort of crazy escape attempt, and I think that escape attempt is what actually sealed Gary's fate ultimately.
Right.
And I think once that happened, I think a few bets were off in terms of his getting off or getting some lighter sentence. But also, let's not forget, by this point, the infrastructure that was keeping was running that operation was dismantled. It had fallen up. It had been exposed publicly. Oliver North had now been given his famous testimony, and become a celebrity as a result, but that whole structure had fallen apart. So it was almost like there was no one left to kind of make the call.
And you're saying you're checking these things out. Did you guys? I mean, I was going to ask you why. It has taken a while to get this to this film to the screen. I mean, were you guys? You almost had to be investigative reporters of sorts, didn't you? I mean, is that part of the reason it's taken so long and collaborating stories and these things?
Yeah, I mean, I think look, there, twofold answer. One, if you're working with HBO, you better get your facts right?
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
You're going to tell something at a high level, on a premium level, and you want to, you got to really do your due diligence, and there's really repercussions to getting these facts wrong.
Yeah,
people's lives, etc., who are telling their stories and who are on screen. I think the other piece of it is you kind of go into these things assuming one thing from a set of characters, right? Like the family and
right.
And yeah, you do become an investigative reporter where you can't really gain credibility with the audience if you can't, really, really confidently tell the story and feel like you've got sort of additional point of view, right? So that's reporters and the journalists, the podcaster, and, his lawyer. And, yes, those are people who give great commentary and they bring some great context. And they're experts in their own right, but it also becomes about sort of gaining the trust of the audience and being like, look, this guy was a nobody, but he was here, and we're going to make sure you really believe that, because it's one thing to hear someone say it in a chair. It's another thing to see it in archive, see it highlighted on a document, hear a phone call. I mean, that prison escape, if we didn't have that footage, which is one of my favorite pieces of archive I've ever seen, where he looks and he just starts running. You can never make that shit up. It's
exactly.
He's like it's because and it really plays in well to who he is, right? He's not. You can't confine this guy, and so long way of saying, yes, we had to become investigative journalists, and we were very pleasantly surprised with what we found. Yeah. Because sometimes you pursue these projects and the other thing happens.
Right.
The deeper you dig, the more disappointed you are. So it really lived up to its expectation in that way.
Well, I mean, what I found personally powerful is this, you have these number of interviews over the years, especially with the family, and you splice those together where they're basically, it seems to me that their story is held together exactly the same over 10 years of filming. They've never changed their story, and the way you've presented that was I thought, quite powerful.
That's a really good point. Thanks for saying that. That was a really great sort of device that both, I think, worked creatively and also worked practically, to your point, of just, really cementing in the minds of the audience that, okay, there's a shared story here, and it's consistent. And also it really gets into this notion of memory and collective memory and family of like, okay, there's a story you get passed down, and there's a story that really happens, and and there's always sort of nuances within that. We sort of wanted to explore that. Frankly, we would have explored it more. We just ran out of real estate. It's only 3 episodes. So,
I mean, not that we're going to be making a doc about everyone's family, but all families have these myths, especially Southern families, I can tell you. I think it's that too. I don't know if your intention, but you also see how these characters are aging over the last 10, 12 years, and it's poignant in its own way, isn't it? Right. Certainly someone like Travis, who's Gary's son, and you see how that's evolved over. Yeah. Well, you see him from really young because of Craig's being a friend of his from like middle school or whatever.
Exactly. Yeah, quite intentional. Intentional, really wanting those characters to arc, emotionally and physically. But Travis, he's a really intelligent guy, and he's got a big heart, and he was, that was definitely a piece that we grappled with. And, I've had conversations with him after the airing of this, and just, how he was presented and how he feels, and, and it's challenging. It's really tough, I think, for him to see himself up there in that way.
Yeah. I mean, it's one question I was going to ask you. So, I mean, what was it like working the family, and then now what do they think of the project now that they've? I mean, because these aren't people who were thinking I'm going to be on the big screen, really, you know. So
no, it's interesting. I mean, Gary, you know, he saw the show, and you know, obviously, you know, he's a big boy and he's been through a lot of stuff. So, and I, you know, I think he's also able to compartmentalize quite well, as you can see in the show. Yeah. So we weren't expecting to have a sort of super emotional response, but I think his response was it was accurate, and he said, so that's how it was, which I think we both felt was a milestone to have passed. And the rest of the family, look, it's tough. It's tough to see yourself up there, and you know, you make a very good point about seeing the family age, you know, but it's also seeing the cost of the story. You know, that one of the things we wanted to do with this story was, you know, subvert some of the expectations a little bit. And yes, we want to have a rollicking ride and take the audience on the journey and have a real good sort of cinematic experience that would be fun to watch and go along with. But we also want to drop these little nuggets of the real cost. Yeah. And, you know, that's the core of the story is, you know, the cost of these things, and, you know, whether it's Reagan administration, you know, doing what he was doing, or whether it's Gary doing what he was doing, there is a cost to the people around them. And so I think just to see that impact on their faces without having to kind of ask the question or kind of hammer the audience over the head, I think was pretty poignant.
I agree, and I think I hadn't even thought of it that in such a universal terms, but certainly at least two characters there thinking, as you actually kind of already pointed out, doing what they thought was right, doing what they thought was best for those they loved, if you want to put it that way, but with all the collateral damage that comes with it. And that's, I think, like you said, it could be, I mean, maybe that's for the scripted film, if you want to have the rogue sort of fella who goes around. But the reality is that there are prices to pay for such a life, however incredible it may be. I mean, you've already mentioned about how you were, it is 3 episodes, and you can get too caught up in 3 acts and chapters and stuff. But it was interesting how you have shaped it. They're almost 3 standalones. They're almost, and as you said, the third one's just premiered in the U.S. So, how did that? I mean, did you approach this as a sort of true crime story, and then that kind of just, as you said, over the years, it's taken on this different shape?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely, we work a lot in true crime, and so I think we also bore easily, and, we've seen stuff, and, the last thing we want to do is make something that nobody wants to watch. Yeah. So, I think when we evaluate a project like this, you say, okay, what are sort of the moments of transformation, right? What are the tent poles, like, and how many are there? And, how many revelations are we really going to be able to offer, in a story like this? And so you look at it as a whole and you go, well, could it be a great feature documentary? Sure. But when you have that sort of, breadth of twists and turns and sort of, unexpected moments, you want to use those, best you can. And it allows you to sort of make the world bigger, right? So you're letting the audience not to just the world of small town Arkansas or the true crime element or, Miami drug scene. You're letting them into also, this bigger political arena. And so it's an onion, but it's also sort of like a, hopefully it's going like that, and the aperture is getting bigger and bigger, and hopefully that's earned, right? And so that's why I think it always felt to us like a series. I don't think, to HBO's credit, I think there was a lot of conversation around, making sure that it deserved the amount of episodes it was getting. Yeah. And so there's a lot of work to ensure that that's really there, because as I'm sure you've seen on TV, there's plenty of series that, frankly would have been better as a one-off.
Yeah.
So
or fewer episodes, or however, won't name names, but yes, but yes, I think we've all been there, and I think probably people are starting to be a little more. I think audiences are probably being more critical of that as well, because it's valuable time that they're dedicating to watching these these films. And but in terms of, I think that's very interesting. So that collaborative process with HBO, how long is that something? Has HBO been on the case for several years? Is that
No, so the collaborative process was really, so the collaboration started first with us and Craig Hodges, this filmmaker, right? And we started talking, and for some reason it took Phil 10 years to mention it to me, but but once we started digging in together, we realized, oh shit, there's really, we should really be pushing this along. He's also always been obsessed with Iran-Contra, and my thing with Iran-Contra was always like, who cares? And I think, I always felt very strongly that Iran-Contra, especially for our generation or the younger generations, it's like, it's a big who cares, and it also is extremely clumsy as a political turning point. I'm like, wait, what? Like, who? Well, why are we talking about Nicaragua? And so it's a lot of explaining. And so from a TV standpoint or a film standpoint, that's a hard thing for audiences to digest. I think what worked really well in episode 3 especially was being able to understand, thanks to some of these experts, really breaking it down for us and simplifying it, that's kind of part of the point. Like the fact that the American public sort of forgot about it, the fact that we're now sort of bringing this up, and the fact that we can draw organic parallels to today without having to say it, or at least getting this conversation about power and getting to the conversation of specifically executive power, that's a really unbelievable thing to be able to do. So it's an opportunity to break down, what Iran-Contra really was, and but also frame it, when you have this but I don't know if I'm being clear, but when you have this sort of anonymous character, for lack of a better way of putting it, he's involved in this thing. Okay, well maybe it's worth another look. You know what I mean? Like, oh, this is really accessible. We've made this thing that's so inaccessible accessible, and that's where the two of us went, oh, okay, yeah, that works. And so that was a big piece of the perspective and point of view and context that we brought. And we said, look, and we worked with Craig, and we looked through all this years and years of footage and tried to pull out the bits that worked and reshoot the bits that we needed to, and all that kind of good stuff. But in the collaboration with not just HBO, but Adam McKay and Tom Schulman, who's the other production company that we partnered with, they had a really fresh look also in saying, okay, well, we haven't even thought about Iran-Contra in God knows how long. So you get these very kind of 2022 kind of like perspectives on something that was pretty, dusty, when we first started looking at it. And I think that's why it has the freshness, because of that collaboration, pushing us to make it as accessible as we could.
Well, yeah. So you've answered the question I was going to ask: is how do you make a film about Iran-Contra interesting when, as you've pointedly point out here and in the film, no one really cared at the time, and certainly doesn't care now.
The sweeping under the rug, and I think that, and the way you do it is make it character, right? I mean, it's not you don't make it about the history of Iran-Contra. You make it about somebody who kind of collides with it, and make it feel present, make it feel like, there's a reason to tell that story now, just by way of interviewing people in 2022 about it. So.
Yeah, and I think it was interesting, as you say, in that episode 3 is, even the journalist who interviewed Gary was, he's not your most... you need to, I was going to ask you what it's like working with Gary, because I think you probably need to ask him same question several times just to make sure that this is all checks out. Because as he said, there's this guy who does cocaine enemas. Maybe maybe he's not the most, not that that's, I'm not passing judgment necessarily, but not that that's the, who is, exactly, who is, is this a reputable witness to all this?
Yeah. No, I'm really glad we leaned into that. And upon rewatching the episode, it really works really well of just, feeling like you understand, yes, he was one of other pilots, and yes, and, even if incredibly talented, but he was an anomaly, and the fact that he was still able to testify at that level of credibility, means, he was such a linchpin, in really connecting all the dots for everyone.
Yeah. But then at the same time, it's that I just thought of this, that whole, that hearing he has, it's practically an empty room he's in when he's testifying there between that committee. I guess it was closed doors, but still up to a point. But, it's quite a story. There's been maybe some spoilers, but I can tell you we're only touching the surface given what we've discussed over the last 30 minutes. So it's quite an incredible story. Quite touches on a lot of different issues. The other side of Gary. One last thing I would ask about Gary is he's kind of this philosopher, smuggler. Interesting insights on life, I guess.
Yeah, he's definitely. You could say he's had some mind-expanding experiences over his life.
Yeah, exactly.
I think there's something. Also about being a pilot. You have to be sort of close to life and death, and I think he has to be sort of close to mortality, and I think that allows him to kind of have this philosophy. I think it allows him to develop this philosophy of just really looking at, and then also he had that whole experience with the Maharishi in the 80s, which I think, Gary is a spiritual guy. He's got a spirituality to him that is sort of beguiling in its own way. He spins his truth.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's I think we're coming to the end of our time together, so I just wanted to ask you guys what's next. Am I reading this right, what I've seen, that you are making a scripted film of this story? Is that something you can say?
Oh, yeah, look, the thing with scripted projects is they take, an extraordinarily long time. It's part of the reason we love nonfiction is we don't really need that. We can pick up a camera and just go, and start making it and doing it and shooting it and cutting it. And then, but I don't know, honestly, I'm not just saying that to be coy. I feel as though, on the one hand, we're always sort of trained in this business to sort of think about, expanding and adapting sort of existing intellectual property or, how can you sort of take this product and commodify it even further? And the truth of the matter is like we said from the beginning, if it's real, what are we going to do? And it's hard to believe that's a real story. Yeah. What the hell are we going to do in the scripted version to surprise you? Have aliens, you know what I mean? So it's like,
well, he's going to have to show up in the White House, I think. He and Ali, exactly. Something's going to happen. Yeah.
Exactly. If you have any ideas, let us know.
Yeah, well, we'll put that out to the audience as a good way of engaging the audience. So if you can, what can you say is next for you guys? Do you have any projects you're working on and you can tell us about?
Yeah, look, we're the types of people, for better or for worse, who, really are always, scrambling for new ideas, not so much for the business reasons as much as like it just kind of sustains us and keeps us going. Yeah. And the thing with production takes time. So even once you get something launched and you're shooting something, it's nice to be able to still continue to sort of exercise that development muscle of the next thing. Yeah. So yeah, we've got several projects that some we're self-financing and just making, and because we're so confident in the stories, and we do so much of the shooting and the filming and the directing and the cutting ourselves. Yeah, we're able to sort of really just kind of make something and really get it further along, as opposed to sort of trying to convince someone of the idea through the traditional route, get it financed, and then go about that way. So we have a couple of those that I guess I probably shouldn't mention. It'd probably be some of me, but it ranges. I mean, we're not very genre specific. I think we really do love the stranger than fiction stuff. We like the quirky thing, and we like the character driven stuff. So, we've got one that is more involved in sort of, I'd say, religion. That's a little more sort of God driven and really questions sort of some of the sort of underlying tenets of faith and how far people are willing to go for it. We're really interested in the sort of historical treasure mystery space where, a lot of, there's a lot of kind of interesting sort of rift between the kind of looting world and the archaeology world, and there's something about those two that, we think is really interesting. We're working on something in that space. And then we have a big 10-part, big crime series that gets into the psychology of crime that I can't really share too much on, but it is in production and it's pretty cool. Yeah.
Well, that's great to hear. I mean, we'll definitely be on the lookout for them. And if we haven't scared you off, hopefully we can have you back on to discuss those projects, because those, I'm sure, if they're anywhere close to what you've done with the Invisible Pilot, will be well worth having a little chat about. So thank you so much for coming on to Factual America. Just to remind our audience, we've been talking with Phil, Lott, and Ari Mark, co-directors and executive producers of The Invisible Pilot, released earlier in April on HBO. It's streaming on HBO Max. Just be on the lookout for it if you don't have access to either one of those for some reason, and for the wider international release. So thanks, guys. It's been great having you on. Love the film, and yes, wish you all the best, and good luck.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks. Appreciate you having us. Okay, take care.
I'd like to give a shout out to Sam and Joe Graves at Intersound Audio in Eskrick, England, in deepest, darkest Yorkshire. A big thanks to Nevin Apaunovich, podcast manager at Alamo Pictures, who ensures we continue getting great guests onto the show. And finally, a big thanks to our listeners. As always, we love to hear from you, so please keep sending us feedback and episode ideas. You can reach out to us on YouTube, social media, or directly by going to our website, www.factualamerica.com, and clicking on the Get in Touch link. And as always, please remember to like us and share us with your friends and family, wherever you happen to listen or watch podcasts. This is Factual America, signing off. You've been listening to Factual America. This podcast is produced by Alamo Pictures, specializing in documentaries, television, and shorts about the USA for international audiences. Head on down to the show notes for more information about today's episode, our guests, and the team behind the podcast. Subscribe to our mailing list or follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Alamo Pictures. Be the first to hear about new productions, festivals showing our films, and to connect with our team. Our homepage is alamopictures.co.uk.